Hello, 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 it's Juliana Michaels and welcome to my channel. In this video, I'm sharing some Tim Holtz Distress techniques that anyone can do using Distress spray stains and Distress inks and/or Distress watercolor pencils. I've combined these products to create a card that's perfect for celebrating spring or Easter. So grab those spray stains and inks and join me for a little inky adventure. As always, please check your stash for similar items when it comes to the stamps, dies, and embossing folders that I'm using. You probably have something similar that you can use. However, if you are interested in any of the products I'm using in this video, you can find the supply list with links in the description box below. When you shop through those links, and whether you purchase that exact item or something else entirely, you're supporting me at no extra cost to you, and I really appreciate that so very much. Now let's get into the making. So the stamp sets I'm going to be working with are the new mixed media set that's called Mixed Media 163. And this one I'm really just using for the sentiment here, but these are kind of a fun new set of stamps and stencils that are now available. So it's a combination stencil and stamp set. And then I'm going to be using Mr. Rabbit, kind of bringing him back. Haven't played with him for a while, but I thought with it kind of being springtime, it'd be a fun one to pull out and play with. And then I've also got some other stamp sets that I'm going to be working with to use on the background. So I've got Ticket Booth, Eccentric, and Flower Shop. And any of these obviously could be switched out, and you could use any other stamp sets that you might want to use for sure. And then the dies that I'm going to be working with are the Tim Holtz repeat pattern. So I'm going to be using this kind of honeycomb pattern here. And then this is a new one to me that I just recently got my hands on, and it's called Wildflowers #1. So I'll be using those two die sets. And then the embossing folder I'm going to be working with is this one here that's called Tiles. And this is a new one to me that I just happened to find. This is an old one that's retired. So if you happen to have it, awesome. If you don't, no worries. The new Diamonds embossing folder that just was released would be a great option to use instead of this one because it's kind of a similar all over repeat pattern. The mediums I'm going to be working with are a combination of Distress spray stains and Distress inks. And the colors for the spray stains I have are Milled Lavender, Scattered Straw, Bundled Sage, and Speckled Egg. And then the Distress inks, I've got the same colors, Speckled Egg, Bundled Sage, Milled Lavender, Scattered Straw, but then I'm also adding in Spun Sugar and Walnut Stain. And if you don't want to use the Distress inks, you could also use the watercolor pencils because we're going to be using one or the other of those can be used for coloring. So you just need to grab those same watercolor pencils if you want to use those instead of the Distress inks. And then the other thing I'm going to be using is the Sizzix Luster Wax, and this is the charcoal color. So it's kind of a silvery blue color. And then I am also going to be using archival ink for the stamping. And I highly recommend some sort of permanent ink, such as archival ink, because of the different mediums I'm going to be working with. So to start off, the first thing I'm going to do is place a piece of Distress watercolor cardstock into my stamping platform here. And I'm just using a little bit of temporary adhesive to help hold that in place. And then I'm going to be selecting some of the stamps from these various sets and kind of creating a stamped, collaged kind of background here with these stamps. So I'm just kind of laying them out and using them to kind of fill in the space here and kind of create my own little background pattern type thing here. So let's get that down just a little bit. All right, so now I've got some of the kind of design laid out there, and so I'm going to just stamp that. Because if I try to add any more stamps, they're going to be hanging off the bottom here, and they're not going to fit in my stamping platform. So I'm just going to ink this up with the Black Soot Archival ink. And because I'm working on that watercolor paper, Probably gonna need to ink this up a couple times just to make sure I'm getting a good impression. Here we go. And now we can move that paper up a little bit and add some more stamps here. So again, I'm just gonna keep just filling in that space using a mix of these stamps. Really, like you can see here, I'm just really just working with kind of filling in that space with different stamps. And it's okay, as you can see, that they're hanging off a little bit. And then again, we're just gonna ink that up. And the reason I'm using, oh, we missed a stamp. The reason I'm using the archival ink is because we're gonna be doing some spray stains over it. And I want the stamped image to stay nice and crisp and not lose any of the design. So if you use like a water-based ink to do this part of the stamping, and then you know, you'll get a slightly different effect, and I probably won't show up quite as starkly as it will by using the archival ink. So now we've got the stamped background. So the next step we're going to do is add the spray stains. So here I'm just working in a splat box, which is really just a cardboard box, and I like to put a little bit of paper towel in the bottom to soak up any of the excess ink. And then now I'm just going to select some of these sprays here, and I'm going to kind of spray them in rainbow order at kind of a diagonal across the background here. And then, you know, anytime when you're working with the sprays, just don't be afraid to push and go. I think that's probably always been my biggest like hold back, is I'm like always afraid to push the nozzle, and really kind of just have to get over it. I find that if I actually press and move at the same time, I kind of feel like I have a little more control of where that ink's going. So we've got the ink sprayed, and so that was the scattered straw, bundled sage, speckled egg, and milled lavender. Now I'm just going to give that a quick little dry with my heat tool. If you want to add a little water on there to help them flow a little bit more, you can. I'm choosing not to. I'm just happy with kind of that gradation of color there that I got. And at this point, if you want to make this darker, you can like respray over these sections. So just to kind of let you see how that looks. So this is just one coat. Now I'm just going to add another layer of each of the inks. It'll just get a little bit darker because these inks tend to, especially when you dry in between, the Distress inks are going to layer and build up in their intensity, versus like if you tried to spray more ink on top while it was wet, then it's going to, you know, the colors are going to kind of flow and blend a little bit more. And as I'm looking at this, I would like a little bit more blue down here, so I'm going to give that another little squirt there and a little bit more up there. And yeah, that's kind of blending a little bit more, but I'm okay with that. And just get that color across there a little bit more. And then from here, I'm just going to give this a real nice, good dry with my heat tool, or you can just let it air dry, whichever you prefer. And then next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the paper and I'm going to emboss it with the embossing folder. To get a really nice impression, I'd like to spray the paper with just a little light misting of water. However, because we've got that Distress spray stain here on the front, I don't want to activate that at all. So I'm going to spray the back side of the paper, then place it into the embossing folder and run it through my die cutting machine. And so here is a look now at the embossed background. And as you can see, that just really adds a ton of more texture and depth to the background versus when it was just stamped and sprayed with the ink. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to trim this down to size, because I'm going to mat this onto another piece of cardstock. So I'm just going to cut this down to 4 by 5 1/4 inches. So now the next thing I'm going to do here is I'm just going to add a little bit of walnut stain distress ink around the edges. So I'm just taking a blending tool and just kind of rubbing that around the edges here. So give it a little bit of a distressed feel. I also like inking the edges because it just kind of makes it feel kind of like the edges are defined, like almost like you're framing it. I always kind of like that look. And as you can see, like when you get that brown ink over the inked areas, it's really kind of pretty. So, you know, if you want to stop at this point and just use this as your background, please feel free to do so. I'm going to add one more little bit of interest here. And for this, I'm going to use that luster wax. And when using the luster wax, I do like to use a glove. And so I'm just getting a little bit of that onto my finger, and then I like to just kind of get it kind of evened out on my finger there. So like kind of rub it around a little bit there. And now I'm just going to hold this down flat, and you can kind of start in the middle because you know that area is going to be getting covered up, and just lightly rub that over the background. And what this adds is very, very subtle. I'm not going for a huge, intense color with this, but when you see it in person, there's just going to be a nice little bit of shimmer to the background that I think is really, really pretty. Like I said, if you don't want to do this step, you can certainly skip it and just leave it as it was before. Now, all this said, I tried this combination of colors and the luster wax, but stamped different colors in the background. And I really felt like the black was the best color to use for the background, or you just kind of lost all of the stamping that you do. So I don't know that you necessarily need to stay with like the same colors for the sprays or anything, but when you do this stamped background that's super busy, and then you kind of have a busy embossing folder over the top of it, you really want to make sure you use like a nice dark ink for the stamping so that it will still show up after you add the embossing and the luster wax, if you add that step. So the luster wax, once it's dry, is permanent. So it's not going to keep rubbing off or anything once it's dry here on your paper. Now, right now it's still kind of setting, so I can kind of rub a little bit of it off. But if you do get it on your hands, it's not the end of the world, or you get some on your craft mat, just take a little bit of some isopropyl rubbing alcohol, and that will wipe it off. Now, if you do get it onto any other surfaces, you do want to get it off as quickly as you can, because like I said, once it's dry, it can be permanent. So you don't want to, you don't want that on your other surfaces. You might just want to be a little cautious there. All right, so our background now is complete, and we're ready to move on to the next step. So now I'm just going to stamp the Mr. Rabbit here, and again, I'm working on a piece of Distress Watercolor cardstock, and pretty much always work on Distress Watercolor cardstock for most of my cards, and I always work on the smooth side as well. So it's just, I don't know, it's just my favorite go-to of the papers that I just like to use. So yeah, there's other papers out there where you can stamp on better, but because we're going to do some watercoloring, I wanted to use watercolor paper because it's going to tolerate that coloring that we're going to do. So I'm going to leave my paper here in my stamping platform. And as I mentioned earlier, if you want to color these with your colored watercolor pencils, you certainly can. Another option is to use the Distress inks. So I'm just going to kind of quick show you both options. And I'm just going to kind of show you the different options so you can kind of see how you can kind of get a similar effect. So this is just some spun sugar, and I'm just going to pick that up here. I'm using a water brush. You could also use a paintbrush. I'm just going to color in the rabbit's ear. And then just add a little tiny bit here to his nose. And then I'm just going to let that dry. And because remember, as I said earlier, with the Distress inks, if you let that dry, and then if you want to make that more pink, a little bolder, you can let that dry and then add more. So here now I'm going to just take the watercolor pencil. So I like to just pull the color straight off the pencil instead of coloring with the pencil, and kind of work it into my brush a little bit, and then use that to color in his bow tie. And that said, I do kind of feel like the Distress inks are going to give you a little bit more intense color. And the other thing about the watercolor pencils is that they will kind of cloud your stamped image. So that's why I like to leave my paper in the stamping platform, because then I can color it with the colored pencils, and then once everything is dry, then I can re-ink and stamp over it. So I'll just give these quick little dry here. Now I'm going to take, so I put that bundled, or the speckled egg here, grab that with my watercolor brush, and I'm just going to kind of color in so you can get, it's a little bit darker, especially with this second coat, but I'll show you here. This is a very light color, but as you can see, it builds up a little bit more, but I feel like it's kind of subtle. I don't know if it's really showing up on the camera, but the ink, Distress ink, definitely gave me more color as compared to the pencil, and some of that might just be these lighter colors that I'm working with. So again, you can just let that dry, and then move on to the next color you want to work with. And for his coat, I'm going to just use a little walnut stain here, and let's get a real light coat of color across his jacket. Again, just kind of let that dry. And I'm going to do the same thing here with his vest. Got the bundled sage. I'm going to color in his vest here with that. And obviously, if you want these colors to be like more bright, I'm going with a obviously kind of more pastel look here this time. So you could certainly pick some brighter colors if you would like. And then now I'm going to start kind of coloring in like the white, and I'm using some pumice stone here. And just getting some good water on my brush. I'm going to use that to kind of help give a little bit of color to these shadow areas on his shirt. And then I'm also going to do some of that here on the rabbit as well. And again, just kind of coloring through those areas where the shadow is from the actual stamped image. I think some of these types of images, the way the stamp design is, it makes it kind of easy to color in because you can see where the shadows are. They're kind of already there for you. You don't have to guess. If you wanted more of a gray rabbit, you could also maybe use like Lost Shadow to do this coloring with. Kind of going with a slightly brown rabbit, I guess. Pumice stone's a little, kind of a mix of the two, but like I said, I'm really just tapping that color around where those shadow areas are. So I'm just going to give that a little dry. And I'm going to go back and add a little more shadow to the jacket. So I'm going to, a little more walnut stain, and now I'm going to go back in with some of these darker areas. and add some more, add like another layer of this. And then you just kind of keep kind of building that up as you like. And then I'm just going to add a little bit more bundled sage to the vest. Like I said, just kind of building up those layers to just get these colors a little more intense. But only after that ink is dry. So I just want to make sure you dry that layer before you add the next one. I'll do a little bit more on the bow tie with the speckled egg. And add a little bit more shadow with the pumice stone to Mr. Rabbit here, kind of around his neck. Dry. And last but not least, I'm going to add a little bit more pink to his ear. So now we're finished with our coloring. We have not moved our paper. If you have, do not do this next step. But I am going to re-ink my stamp with that archival ink and stamp back over my colored image. And so that's without, and now we're going to get, kind of see this, make it like pop just a little bit more. Subtle difference, but makes a difference when you re-stamp it after you've colored. Then from here, I'm just going to take some scissors and fussy cut around Mr. Rabbit. I am not going to cut out his whiskers. I'm just going to trim those off and pretend like he doesn't have whiskers. And then he'll be ready to use for my card. So these are the Wildflower dies, and I die cut these from Distress Watercolor cardstock. And now I'm going to watercolor these with the Distress ink. Again, you could also use the pencils if you want. And just going to kind of use that same technique that I used on the rabbit, but on these die cuts. So now I'm just going to put some bundled sage on the stems of each of the flowers. Okay. I'm going to add some of the scattered straw. And you can see I'm just kind of tapping this on. I'm not brushing so much as just tapping and just getting some color onto these little pieces here. And as I mentioned earlier, if you want to build up color, just let that dry and then come back. You can add some more. Add a little more green here to these sections. Put some speckled egg on this one. And we'll put the milled lavender on this last one here. I thought this one kind of looked like a lavender stem, so partially why I chose that color for this one. And we can just go back and add more color as you like. And I think I'm gonna get this one a little quick dry before we add some more because it's still kind of wet. And the ink's just gonna blend in. I won't really layer too much if I try to put it on there. And so you can just keep repeating that process until you're happy with how they look. Another thing you can do is just kind of smush your die cut into any of the ink that's on your craft mat. Pick that up, that'll add some little speckledy splotches if you're so inclined. So another fun little tip that I wanted to share was just die cutting with this repeat patterns die. It's made to do just what it is, repeat patterns. So what I've done is just die cut it once here and pop that loose. So you'll see you've got your die cut here. And then you're going to get some of these areas that are kind of embossed into the paper. And what that is that's just meant to help you line up with the die. So I just took it from here and then I'm just kind of sliding it over. and putting it into position, and then I can cut it again. And if you're worried about it sliding, you know, you can just grab some mint tape and use that to help hold it in place. Gonna get it lined back up, and then you can just run it right back through. As you can see, I got a little sideways on my die cutting here, but as you can see, you can just keep repeating that until you have a piece as big as you like. And if you wanted to make it longer, you could also do that same thing, just kind of line it up on the bottom there and do the same thing and move it over and get a little bit longer piece if you like. So then once you have your background repeat pattern cut out, then you can just take some scissors and kind of trim it to whatever size you might want to put on for the background of your card. So here, you know, I just trim this down a little bit and kind of square it off maybe. And then for me, just kind of making this a little more square to the background. And you don't need to cut every piece the same. Kind of cut different angles and kind of just make it whatever you want. So it's really just a matter of playing around with that until you get it how you like. So when it comes to gluing down these like super fine pieces, I usually don't stress over trying to get adhesive on every little section of this. So the first thing I would do is decide whether you want to pop up anything, add any like dimension with some foam adhesive, which I will behind the rabbit. And then, you know, and then you're going to have adhesive to attach the rabbit sections to your background. So that's going to hold down a lot of that background as it is. So like I wouldn't super stress over really trying to add any adhesive onto that background piece. I also do find that the luster wax can be a little bit of a challenge to adhere to. So that said, if you do use some sort of adhesive, you might want to make sure you get something that a little on the stronger side. And as far as like sticking this larger piece down, I'm probably going to use like some red line tape to help hold it down on top of that wax. And then the same thing with these, I'm going to, you know, be tucking them kind of behind the Mr. Rabbit. So again, I don't need to worry about a ton of adhesive for all these little sections. I can just kind of play around with their positioning and get those mostly held down with adhesive from behind the rabbit. So hopefully that helps a little bit and makes sense. So here's kind of a look at the back side. So I've got some pieces of 1mm foam adhesive on the back of the rabbit, and then I put the flower die cuts behind there and then the repeat pattern background. And as you can see, it's pretty, I just added a little bit of adhesive to glue this little section together. But other than that, that foam tape is holding everything pretty good into place. And then from here, I can just add some of the red line tape kind of over these sections where the foam tape is to then adhere it to my card background. Here's a look at the finished card. I hope you enjoyed seeing just how easy it is to use Distress spray stains and Distress inks to create a card. When it comes to adding color with Distress products, there really are so many great options. Until next time, stay crafty, my friend. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you can join me on a more regular basis. Hit the like if you enjoyed this video, and if you want to join me on my other social media platforms, you can find the links to those in the description box below. Also, feel free to leave me a comment if you have any questions or if there's something you'd love to share with me and our community. I'll see you in the comments below and in the next video. Until next time, stay crafty, my friend.